Everybody still awake? This used to be the time of day when it was, at my university, very difficult to teach because for the 2:30 classes, students would just be waking up. They would have had breakfast, lunch, and they'd come into class. And especially when I had full classes, usually the back 2 rows would just be kind of in that post-meal haze in which they were slightly dozing off. And of course, I have the kind of voice. And if you would like to do this, please feel free to just relax and doze off and help digest your meal. Very often, the back 2 rows would be completely asleep by the end of the class. And every so often, when I was more mobile and I would walk around with the microphone, I'd just sneak up on the students and I'd ask them a question. Oh, no, I can't do that today, so I won't. Nobody should be afraid. So, thank you for the very kind intro. My wife, Dr. Taylor, and I have been very, very warmly received and have been truly impressed with the conference and with the work you have done and continue to do here. So I wish to thank some of the many people who've made this possible, the conference possible, and also made it interesting. Dr. Yun Jae-wong, president of Donggukyu, the Venerable Jondo, chair of the Buddhist Studies department, and the really visionary organizer of the 6 international meditation conferences. The Venerable Ju Kyung, chair of the Central Council of the Jugye Order, who created the really interesting temple stay program that we heard about yesterday. Ms. Bokwe Lee in Buddhist Studies. She's an ABD student. Do you have that term here, ABD? In North America, it means all but dissertation. It means all your coursework is done, you have one final hurdle, and that's to write the dissertation. Of course, that may take, for some people, years. Hopefully not in Ms. Lee's case. In fact, I'm sure it won't. Dr. Sun Jin Bai, whose management company very skillfully has managed the conference. And I particularly want to thank the translators who have taken our ideas and in a way that we could never have done, communicated them very effectively to the people in our audience. We really owe a great debt of gratitude to our translators, so please. And I also want to have make special appreciation to my wife and life partner, Dr. Liz Taylor, who has been my companion in this very fascinating journey we've taken together almost 4 decades now, and who was a wonderful child psychiatrist who effectively brought healing to many, many hundreds of her patients over the almost 4 decades in which she practiced. So with all that as a background, let's see. Will this work if I do this? Yeah. So I would like to begin by talking about, actually, I also want to thank all the other presenters. It's been a wonderful conference. It's been a fascinating conference. And I think what I have to say will touch base with pretty much every one of the talks. And I kind of want to begin by talking about where things were and how far we've come in the last half century in terms of understanding things like, obviously, mindfulness, which really was basically unknown when I was entering college. It was known among scholars of Buddhist studies. But it wasn't really known in the general North American population culture, even academic culture. But also one of the other things that Dr. Chun's talk I found particularly interesting because the whole idea of psychological stress as a factor at all in disease was really completely outside of the mainstream when I first got interested in it in the summer before my entrance into university. So this was, it was a longer time ago than I care to realize. It was the only person who was working in this area was a scientist from McGill named Hans Selye. And I got interested in this because my father had late onset diabetes and had started at a particularly stressful moment in his life. And I thought maybe the stress had had an influence on this late onset diabetes. And I started researching this. And that's the summer before I entered college, I was in a program at the Albany Medical Center. It was a hospital, training hospital in Albany, New York, near where I grew up. And I started talking about this to some of the physicians there, the doctors in training, and they just laughed. They said, oh yeah, that person's really not sick, it's all in their head. Sure. And that was, it was about 60 years ago. I then wrote a paper, the only paper I ever got an A+ on in all my 4 years in university, even close to an A+, and it was on psychological stress as a factor in the etiology of late onset diabetes. And my preceptor thought it was absolutely, my teaching assistant thought it was a wonderful paper. He said, you have a future in psychology, come to my lab. Anyway, this just to show you what the gap was between what we heard in the last 2 days and where things were then. So in the new year, I went to his lab and he greeted me with open arms and he's, come look, I have something really exciting to show you. And he brought me in and there was a rat laid out in a terrarium. And he had cut the top of the rat's head off. And he said, watch, look at this. And he took an electrode and he stuck it into part of the rat's brain and the rat went, and they took it out, dropped it, and I went, oh, I forgot I had another appointment. Out the window, out the door, not the window. I felt like jumping out the window. So we have come a long, long way. Change happens very slowly, but change does happen. Now, when I got to university and when I ran out of the psychology department, I eventually ended up with a number of one particularly influential professor. And maybe I'll use this. There you go. His name was Du Wei Ming. Professor Du, as we called him, had just finished a PhD at Harvard. He was from Taiwan. And he was a Neo-Confucian. He was a Neo-Confucian who was starting to develop his own philosophy of Neo-Confucian or Neo-Confucianism as an eco-feminist philosophy for the end of the 20th and early into the 21st century. He was a very charismatic figure. And his interest in studying the problem of self-cultivation, how we attain our potential as human beings, our deepest potential as human beings, was something that I found absolutely riveting. And it led me into graduate study. But you know, I went into graduate school with the naive idea that somehow I could pursue a spiritual practice and an academic practice at the same time. And in fact, you can't get enlightened, at least in North America, by studying in an academic institution. Here you have this wonderful blend at this university of academics and practice, academics and practice. There's a really important relationship between them. And, but not in those days, not in the States, in fact, still not in North America, really. So not only was Professor Du very important an influence, but he also introduced me to the practice side of the equation, to a Zen master named, Myoshinji Zen master named Joshu Sasaki, who was about to come to the East Coast for the first time. He'd been in the States for 6 or 7 years. It was a very important engagement for me. I ended up practicing with Sasaki Roshi for over 40 years and being ordained by him. Another important intellectual influence through Professor Du is the Neo-Confucian philosopher Wang Yangming. And as I was developing and thinking about how to bring together the spiritual and the academic, I recalled that Professor Du used to talk very much about this empirical orientation of Wang Yangming, who said, if you want to know the bitterness of the bitter melon, you have to eat a bitter melon yourself. Kind of obvious, it's obvious to most people, but not in the academy, not so obvious. Then, of course, as Dr. Christeller pointed out, William James. And as I, again, started to think about developing the area of contemplative studies, this is a very inspirational quote from James. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. Of course, James was a century and a quarter ahead of his time. That's a long way. James was really innovative. And if you haven't read James in translation, or in English if you can, he's a really important thinker, not only a founder of the field of psychology, but also the critical study of religious experience. He wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience, foundational work, very important. Another really important philosopher introduced to me by Professor Du is Nishida Kitaro, the founder of the Kyoto School of Zen. And in thinking about the nature of human experience and contemplative practice these days, I think it's very, very helpful and particularly corrective for my students and for colleagues to try to come to grips with this idea. And it involves actually something that Dave Vaga was talking about today, is the decentering the self. It is not, says Nishida, that experience exists because there is an individual, as most of us think, but that an individual exists because there is experience. Okay? Let's redo that. I want to emphasize this again. It is not that experience exists because there is an individual, but that an individual exists because there is experience. This pure experience for Nishida is both pre-reflective and immediate. It transcends both subject and object, self and other, in such a way that it does not contain any specific individual or personal content. So for Nishida, individuality emerges from a continuum of undifferentiated experience. Okay? Now, we started out in contemplative studies very, very early. So now I taught my first course in which the very radical pedagogical tool of actually doing a contemplative practice in a classroom setting. I taught that for the first time a quarter century ago last spring. I was very pleased that at the 25th reunion of the class of 2000 at the Brown University, 3 of my students from that class came. It was very rewarding to see what they'd done with their lives, and that they were still, in some ways, using the tools that we had given them from that class. This contemplative studies initiative started really with that, right around the same time that your Temple Stay program was starting here. And your Temple Stay program takes the outside world, brings it to the monastery. What we were doing in contemplative studies in some ways is taking the monastery and bringing it into the outside world, into the academy. This is the the main page of the website that radically was, for the first time, created in 2005. Now, imagine a world really without the internet, but just the internet just starting, and in which websites were almost unheard of. And I was very surprised one day. I was walking across the main green, and one of my colleagues came up from a different department and congratulated me. And now, contemplative studies started off as just a small group of kind of misfits in different departments who thought that communicating, we'd all had contemplative practices of one kind or another, and we felt very strongly that it would be important to communicate these to our students because they had benefited us in many ways. And we started out, what should we call ourselves? We argued back and forth, meditation studies, consciousness studies, ended up with contemplative studies, and what should we be? Well, we're not a department, we're not, anyway, we went through the list. The only thing that wasn't defined in the Brown University rules was initiative, so we called ourselves an initiative, Contemplative Studies Initiative. I was surprised because she said, congratulations, you have a whole department. That's kind of baked into the university, long-standing thing. And I was taken aback. She said, well, you have a website, right? And the fact that we had a website somehow legitimated us in a way that was way beyond how we were really existing at the time. Now, this was the floor of we got the use of the dance studio. Still to this day, Brown University has not given us a dedicated meditation space, to their shame. But we would, for the first 15 years or so we used the dance studio because dancers like to stay up late. Maybe it's true here. Do you have a dance program here? Theater and dance? Yes? And dancers like to stay up late, at least in North America, but they don't like to get up early. So we could use the dance studio if we went in at like 8 or 9 in the morning. So that's what we used, and that was where we would set up Zafu's and Zabuton's meditation cushions. And now, the background for my slides, you can see in the picture on the top, it's the floor of the dance studio. I don't know, I like it as a background. I don't know, maybe other people don't, but. So, as we're developing contemplative studies, it's an emerging field. We identify the varieties of contemplative experiences, the whole spectrum of them. We engage in scientific and philosophical discussions, analysis of them. We cultivate first-person knowledge of them, and then we assess their meaning and significance. What is contemplation? Of course, if you're talking about contemplative studies, you have to define contemplation. The working definition, the focusing of the attention in a sustained fashion, leading to deepened states of concentration, tranquility, and insight, a broadening of the awareness, greater understanding of oneself, and we heard this talked about as pro-social experiences earlier today. I would call them, another way to look at them is self-contextualizing experiences. You understand yourself in the greater context in which you're embedded. And that demonstrate that no matter how much we feel alone as individuals, we are always part of some greater context. And these are the basis for other regarding virtues that people develop, including empathy, humaneness, compassion, loving kindness, and so on. Contemplation occurs on a spectrum from the rather common spontaneous experiences of absorption in an activity. The experiences which psychologists, and now really out in the general population, based on the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, they call flow. Anybody familiar with the concept of flow and Csikszentmihalyi's book? Really, somebody definitely worth reading. Also, the name is really impossible to pronounce. Students, when they give presentations on Csikszentmihalyi's work, usually refer to him as the author. So on a spectrum that includes these spontaneous experiences of absorption and activity to the most profound, deliberately cultivated experiences in religious traditions, the ones that we may be more familiar with as being contemplative. In the first category, we have what I would call non-intentional contemplation, the flow experiences. Practices that lead to deeper states of focused attention, but those practices are not done in order to produce those states, at least not consciously. They're done for their own sake. So chess, or various kinds of sports, or rock climbing, or surfing in some cases, and these involve effortless attention. In these practices, there is no conscious or intentional practice of meditation, but they can generate deep attentional focus. And these are some examples, playing chess, rock climbing, and so on. Or other examples. Okay, anybody, you get 10 points for identifying the pitcher. Anybody know? Who is it? Oh, I said, yeah. How are you? Do you know who the pitcher is? Park Chan-ho, right. At this point in his career, pitching for the Dodgers. So, Major League Baseball players, and I'm sure KBO players will also report this, that they are so much into that they don't. At least I don't know about KBO, but Major League Baseball, they don't practice meditation. But they get into these states of, they call it getting into the zone. And they can actually see the difference between these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different kinds of pitches based on, now, if you follow baseball, you know that some pitchers throw between 95 and 100 miles an hour, and the pitching mound is 60 feet 6 inches away from home plate. So the ball's on you like that. To be so in the zone that you can actually see where the seams are, as you see in this example. That's to be in the zone. That's a contemplative state. It's on a continuum with the deliberately cultivated contemplative practices that we see in meditational traditions. And we need to study them together and not see them as fundamentally different. Meditational practices that are in category 2 in contemplative, among contemplative practices, these are deliberately focused on attaining contemplative states. In secular contexts, we see that this is often used to improve concentration in the workplace, deeper personal fulfillment in life, and we have seen in the last 2 days a variety of applications, practical applications. But in sacred and religious contexts, the goal is to realize our full potential as human beings through the experience of non-duality and integrating that experience into our daily lives. And we see this with meditation traditions, dedicated meditation centers, such as those associated with this university. Now, studying these deep contemplative states, and by the way, this is an interesting picture. Anybody recognize the young man on the left-hand side facing you? You probably don't know. I'm going to introduce him to you. You see who it is on the right? He's sleeping in the front seat because the front row, because I've actually put him to sleep. Again, I told you this is a danger of listening to me at this time of day. Here is Dr. Vago and one of the graduates of our contemplative studies program, of whom I'm very proud, Matthew Saket, about to torture another Tibetan Buddhist cleric, which they did a lot in those days, I think, by putting that nun into an fMRI machine. Now, what Matt Saket is doing, he's now come back to the area. He's at Harvard, and he's studying these advanced states of non-duality, these advanced states of meditation. And in his words, the practices, how these practices unlock the mind's capacity to experience the highest forms of human well-being. These are also very important contemplative practices. So, one of the ways in which I see contemplative studies is that it embraces both intentional contemplative practice, so meditational practices, but also the flow activities that are non-intentional. And that these are related to mindfulness in that mindfulness in its most basic definition, and not the one that's very common these days that John Kabat-Zinn set up, but really what it means is that Eric Laux touched upon this yesterday. It's to remember. So I don't know about what the term is in Korean, and probably you transliterate mindfulness now because, at least in Chinese, the term really means to remember. And what is it to remember? It's to remember to come back again and again and again when your mind slips to whatever you've decided to focus and concentrate on. Whatever it is in your meditation practice or in your learning how to throw a baseball or to hit a baseball, you have to come back. And often mind wandering, as we know about we've heard from Dave Vago about the default mode network, that minds wander and we have to come back. And we have to remember to come back again and again and again. And that we can practice that, and then over time that becomes, we can see the state of mindfulness that we can be in where without exerting much effort we can be there. But then of course sometimes we'll fall out if we're not practicing. But then eventually over time, as you practice more and more, it becomes a trait. And that becomes a trait that stays with you more than it departs from you. The value of continued mindfulness practice over time. So, how do we study contemplative practices at Brown? We look at the general fields of contemplative studies. That includes the sciences, the humanities, the creative arts. How did we start? Starting with probably, again, about 20 years ago, we started to have students major in contemplative studies related programs. One of the first things we did was we established a presence on our campus. Since 2006 until now, we've organized 242 lectures, retreats, concerts, films in the sciences with contemplative practitioners, with philosophers. We've had a lot of, we've been able to generate interest on the campus by bringing specialists in. We established eventually a formal major with a unique pedagogy. And I want to, this is our first graduating class, but I also want to call attention to one of our colleagues that Eric mentioned yesterday. And I think maybe Dave included her name in a couple of publications, Kathy Kerr. Along with Willoughby Britton, who we've heard about the last 2 days. Willoughby and Kathy brought contemplative science to Brown, and we worked together to create this full contemplative studies program that involves the humanities and the sciences and practice and education. Kathy very sadly passed away in November 2016, and we really miss her. She was very interested in classical Chinese medicine, and we have a lecture series in her honor that we're still, in fact, I just saw that my colleague Larson DiFiore is bringing somebody in. All of these are available online. And by the way, please, if you're interested at all, go to our website, our Contemplative Studies website. If you just do a search for Contemplative Studies, you'll find us. And you're welcome to join us for any of these lectures. Kind of time difference may be challenging, but we often have them at night. They'll be the morning for you, so maybe not so bad. Since 2014, when we had a formal major accepted, we have graduated 75 students. These students were in our first graduating class. I'm very, very proud of them. We keep track of what they're doing. In the interest of time, you can ask me afterwards, and I can go into detail. We're very proud of all of them. In fact, the young woman who is on one to the third person in, she graduated from our program and went to work right away for the Mind and Life Institute, and she was the principal organizer for the Botswana conference in 2017, 2018, that the Dalai Lama almost attended. Politics, Chinese government politics made it difficult. We also served, I like the concept of an incubator. I learned this from an American television series called Silicon Valley, the idea of an incubator. But in many ways, we incubated a number of programs that developed, one in the medical school, and there's Dr. Laux. Before he's had to deal with the hassles of the Brown administration, which has turned him a little gray, starting to turn gray as a result of this university politics. Thankfully, you professors here don't have to deal with university politics because you practice Zen, so you're beyond university politics. So we're served as an incubator. We've developed, this is actually not a complete list even, 44 new courses that we've added to the curriculum. And just to take a moment to look through them. They include courses taught by Professor Laux, also his colleague Judd Brewer, a course also that Kathy Kerr developed, Cognitive Neuroscience and Meditation, but also a lot of humanities courses. And all of these courses feature what we call meditation labs. So these are labs, again, they're scheduled like laboratory sessions of science courses. So all of these courses they either meet 3 times a week for 50 minutes or twice a week for 50 minutes. And in those labs, students try out contemplative practices that are directly related to what we are reading in that particular week. The major requires 12 courses, 12 of the 30 courses that you have as a Brown undergraduate, or 32 courses maybe, to get a BA. 6 courses we have, I'm still using an old slide, it's actually cost 100, doesn't matter. Intro to Contemplative Studies, Introduction to the Field. Every new academic field needs to have its own distinctive methodology and needs to start training people in that methodology. And then students who are doing a sciences track take a minimum of 2 humanities courses that are related and vice versa. Humanities students take at least 2 science courses. And then they also will then do 6 courses in their track, sciences or humanities. And now we also have a way to work the arts in it. Many of our courses teach students basic meditational practices in the context of academic study. However, the problem is that meditation is perceived by many as a religious practice that should not be promoted in a secular university. This is a real challenge. It has been a real challenge for us. Many colleagues and administrators see contemplative studies courses that include contemplative practice as promoting a particular religion, usually Buddhism. And so to counteract that perception, our courses explicitly confirm their critical spirit and empirical nature. What do I mean by that? This is what, for the first 15 years in our courses, we made this statement. This course is an example of what we call critical first-person learning. Critical, because in many forms of first-person learning in the context of religion, one must suspend critical judgment and believe in the various truths of the tradition. There's an important place for this form of committed first-person learning in our private lives, but we should be careful not to require that kind of commitment in a secular university. By contrast, in the critical first-person learning, which we do in this course, the need to believe is removed. We will read and analyze a variety of texts. This is what we call third-person learning. I'll speak about that a little more in a minute. We will observe how our minds and bodies work while trying out a variety of simple meditation techniques derived from these texts in laboratory sections scheduled like labs and science courses. We will critically discuss these texts in light of our experiences in the meditation lab. Without doubt, this kind of novel pedagogy is not for everyone. If for any reason the student is unable to participate in the med lab component of the course, we will be happy to make arrangements to do alternative work of equivalent value. So over now the more than 25 years I've been teaching courses like this, I've taught over 2,000 students. Only 2 students during that time have ever taken this option. And I have both required and recommended readings, and I just asked those students to do the recommended readings in addition to the required ones. So what's it like? What's one of these courses like? What's the pedagogy like? So, as I said, MedLab courses combine traditional third-person study of contemplative practices in their philosophical and historical context. With, third person, it's what is widely done throughout the academy, in universities all over the world. You study the history, you study the culture, you study the tradition, you study the philosophy. We combine those third-person approaches with critical first-person methods in which students empirically experience and critically examine contemplative techniques. Most importantly, of course, meditation, without prior commitment to their efficacy. Hence, they learn the meditation practices along with their spiritual and cultural cognitive contexts and test them out empirically in the laboratories of their own body-minds. This is an example of Intro to Contemplative Studies in which we study the classical Taoist tradition. And in this first week of the class, we look at primary texts. In this case, we look at a very important. How many of you have heard of the Lao Tzu or the Tao Te Ching? Foundational Taoist work. Definitely important to study. Well, the work that we study in this first week is actually earlier than the Tao Te Ching. At least that's what I argue in my second book. And we study that. We look at secondary scholarship about how to study contemplative traditions. And one of the first important works we read is by Alan Wallace, called The Taboo of Subjectivity. Again, a book that I recommend very highly. Wallace criticizes the way in which subjective experience has been written out of university education, has been written out of scientific research, and in some ways, many ways, has been written out of humanities scholarship as well. And then he makes an argument for why it's important to bring that back in. But at the same time we study this in a 2.5-hour weekly class meeting, we also have meditation labs in which we try out contemplative practices that are found in the texts themselves. Another example would be in the next week, the Satipatthana Sutta that Dave Vaga was talking about, that Eric was talking about. And when we read the Satipatthana Sutta, we actually try out the techniques of the Satipatthana, the Foundations of Mindfulness Sutta. Take a long breath, and we go through that, but then students they're not forced to believe that this is going to make them calmer or more tranquil. If they say, well, it's not working, this is nonsense, it's fine. The most important thing is that they understand what the tradition has said about what are the expectations for experience, and that they're not forced to believe in them. They test them out in the laboratories of their own body, minds. It's a wonderful collage photo taken in the dance studio one morning that we were teaching. This is already about 10 or 12, no, this is about 15, more than 15 years ago. It's when I could still cross, when I still had knees, still had my original knees. I've had both of them replaced in the last 9 months. So, in meditation labs, we start with some sort of introductory yogic or qigong practice that concentrates on positions that make muscles and joints and ligaments involved in meditation more flexible. Then we work with a contemplative technique for that week or for that lab. Then it's time for questioning, and then there's journaling. Now we do online journaling. So students get a chance to talk about, they try the technique, they relate it to the reading that we're doing, and then they relate it to their own experience, and we discuss it. And so this is based on the kind of rationale for this, is that we have these 4 interactive epistemologies, that is, methods or theories of knowing. We have third-person perspectives, look at things from a distance. Second-person perspective, you engage in direct communication, person-to-person communication, asking questions, responding with answers. First-person perspectives are, epistemologies are really subjective experience, which we've now brought into the classroom. And then there's another dimension of first-person subjective experience, and that is what I would like to call no-person experience. That is immediate, non-intentional experience, not processed through a sense of self-identity. It is experience that is non-self-referential. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Again, this is third-person learning, and these MedLab courses certainly have that. We have second-person learning, intersubjective communication. Deep listening is a practice, a second-person practice. There have been second-person epistemologies started to be used in scientific research contests developed in France by Claire Petit-Mongin and Michael Bitbol and their group. And then first-person learning experiences, as we see in the med labs. And then no-person learning. So within first-person learning, there is the immediate momentary experience, sipping tea, breathing in, breathing out. There's pure sensation without objectification. The sensation of the entire body without the interference of processing your bodily awareness through your sense of self-identity. No-person epistemologies are spontaneous, uncategorized awareness of the constant flow of immediate experience in the present moment without objectification by the first-person experiencing subject. So there is a kind of continuum of experience interpretation, experience objectification that's constantly going on. It's important to remember that that consciousness is dynamic, and sense of self is dynamic. And interesting, the idea of no self that Dave Vago talked about today. Actually, what it really, I think, always meant is there's no fixed or permanent sense of self or self-identity. The early Buddhist tradition that emphasized no self did so in contrast to the Hindu traditions in the early Hindu texts that said that underlying everything was a kind of deeper self. And for reasons of, I think, practical reasons, early Buddhist teachers thought that if you had a concept of a transcendent self that you were attempting to experience, that would actually block you from having the experience. Having that as a goal, and always you have a tendency to check. It's what, I don't know if this is cross-cultural, but when I was a kid, we would take long trips and we'd kind of get bored. And so we would go, are we there yet? I'd say, Mom, Dad, are we there yet? No, not there yet. Okay. I think now you have cell phones, kids don't get so bored. But this are we there yet phenomenon also can occur with spiritual practice. You know, if you have a goal, you have to be careful that the goal will motivate you to begin with, but it could also block you, because if you're constantly comparing where you are to where you hope to be, it's not going to allow you to get there. Anyway, so this spontaneous, uncategorized awareness, this no-person epistemology, is what I would like to call non-dual cognition. There's no time to talk about one of my colleagues in cognitive sciences, Takeo Watanabe, has developed something called task-irrelevant cognition or task-irrelevant perception. I think it actually relies on no-person epistemology. It's related to Gilbert Ryle's knowing how. It's related to James Initiative's idea of pure experience. It is palpable. It is embodied. Some of it is subsequently objectified and then cognized through attention, and some of it is not, and forms a kind of background awareness. I think Dave was touching upon this earlier. So non-dual epistemology is knowing or cognition that is independent of the dualistic separation of self and other. It does not depend on a self-concept. In many traditions, including Zen and classical Taoism, this non-dual epistemology is taken to support a non-dual ontology, a theory of being, a theory of something that is foundational in the world. It's kind of part of a philosophical orientation, an explanatory orientation to the experience of non-duality. So this often takes the form of affirming that there is a power, a force, a field, an energy, an entity, a consciousness, a mind, be that monistic, unified or pluralistic or theistic, material or immaterial. There's a power force field that underlies the phenomenal world. And so you have the Tao in the Taoist tradition. You have, in the Son tradition, true mind. You have the notion of Buddha nature. These are all aspects of non-duality. Also, we start to see this, and Dave was talking about this earlier today. Non-duality is starting to come into scientific research. And in the work of Eric Garland and Yoshi Nakamura that Dave referenced today, we see non-dual awareness has started to be researched. Individuals who, according to them, report more frequent non-dual awareness show a pattern of personal characteristics. They report having a greater capacity to decenter, loosening the boundaries of the self by encouraging a metacognitive perspective in which one disidentifies from self-referential cognitions and thereby de-reifies the self as the subject of experience. More frequently endorsed by individuals who report being non-reactive by virtue of their ability to observe thoughts from a reflective distance. They have high levels of interoceptive, integrated mind-body awareness. Thus, it may be that closely attending to bodily experience encourages NDA. And they've developed a non-duality-based mindfulness practice that has been really successful in treating opioid addiction. Their practices help to bring about the same kind of non-attachment to the exclusive perspective of the self that enables what they call non-reactive or non-self-referential metacognition, as Dave was talking about earlier today. And these qualities are precisely what we have been developing in our contemplative studies students for the past quarter century. One of the recently published research studies that looked at students in our contemplative studies classes, the study was led by Willoughby Britton and worked with our courses. And they studied our students at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester. And what they really found very dramatic improvements. They actually found that women benefited more than men over the course of a semester, but that both of them actually developed using the 4 factors of mindfulness. And you can see in the graphs, they all ended up having improved experiences. I can't even read my own slides at this point, but I hope you can see them. So over the course of the semester, combining first-person practice sessions in the labs with third-person study had a really dramatic effect in improving anxiety, depression, self-criticism, self-judgment, and developing greater awareness. And so what we end up attempting to do, at least at Brown, is develop contemplative intelligence. We have this unique form of studying traditional forms of meditation through, in conclusion, empirical non-self-referential, no-person epistemology, empirical self-referential first-person epistemology, intersubjective second-person epistemology, academic third-person epistemology, yielding what we call contemplative intelligence. And we provide students with an introduction to the practice of contemplative methods in a secular setting and to the mind's ability to focus attention at a moment of time of great environmental, global, and political stress. And we train students in the complementary scientific and humanistic study of contemplative practice to better equip them for a whole range of new jobs in the changing workplaces of the 21st century, as well as a foundation for postgraduate study in a number of fields. And we provide them with the tools of contemplative intelligence that will be beneficial to them throughout the rest of their lives. And with that, I want to thank you for your patience at the end of a long day, at the end of a long lecture. And I see that most of you have not fallen asleep, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
네, 멋진 강연 그리고 통찰력 넘치는 여러 가지 말씀 있으셨습니다. 감사드리고요. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Now we will begin the Q&A session. I'd like to ask one of the selected questions now. Question is, some people associate meditation with a specific religion, which may cause challenges when introducing it into public education. What kind of attitude, method, or strategies do you think are necessary in such cases?
Wonderful question. I attempted to address that. Actually, it was just coincidence earlier in talking about what we call the empirical directive. So one of the things that's really important to do is emphasize the empirical nature of the practice, that no matter what your belief system is coming in, we're not going to force you to take one particular set of truths that surround the practice and adopt them as your own. We teach you the contemplative practice. We teach you the cognitive framework in which that practice is embedded, which includes doctrines, teachings, and so on, philosophies. We teach you the cognitive framework, but we don't force you to believe in the truth of that cognitive framework. You can try it out, you can test it, you can check it out, you can learn what it is, but that's a fundamental problem, and that's one of the the issues that we received a lot of pushback from colleagues on. That is that they could not conceive of doing a contemplative practice in the classroom in a setting like that, in a way that doesn't force people to. In fact, the people who ran the department I was in, the Department of Religious Studies, at the time I first started coming out of the closet as a contemplative teacher, contemplative practice teacher, they said, forcing your students to do a meditation practice in the classroom is no different from forcing them to get down on their knees and accept Jesus as their Savior. And I went, I'm not forcing them to do that. I'm not forcing them to believe in anything that they can't test out in the crucible, in the lab of their own body-mind. And they went, that's not possible. And I said, well, come to class. You know, they actually tried to force me to stop teaching. Not only any course with a contemplative practice component, they said, you can't teach any courses on Buddhism. But you see, by the time I had come out of by the time I started doing this, I'd already gotten tenure, and I don't know if that's something you know about here, but my job wasn't really threatened. All they could do is reduce my annual salary, which of course they were happy to do. But the thing is that in doing any kind of innovation and in developing the kind of research that we've heard about from the scientists who work on contemplative practice, you have to have patience. You know, and Mahayana Buddhism talks about the perfections of the Bodhisattva. And two of them are the perfection of patience, Kshanti Paramita, and the perfection of persistence. You have to be patient and persistent and be willing to play the long game. So with that in mind, it's very important to emphasize the empirical nature, and that, you know, you can have a kind of what I would call a kind of explanatory democracy, where a lot of people, I know in your country here, in our country, really feel democracy is very important. Political democracy is very important. I also think explanatory democracy is very important. Always what comes first and foremost is our experience. There's this dialectic going on, a recursive relationship going on between experience and interpretation, experience and explanation. But as somebody starts a practice, as somebody develops a practice, you have to give them the freedom to choose which explanation they think most suits their own empirical experience.
Thank you. Next question is, if meditation studies become established in university and students continue their practice, what kind of influence and value do you think this could have beyond the university in families, communities, and society at large?
I think it has as I think all of our speakers believe fervently, that the work that we're doing in colleges and universities will move out into the larger communities that surround us. That it has the potential to, in the various contexts in which we live, to help people appreciate the fundamental interrelatedness with one another as human beings, with one another as creatures in the world, manifesting what our first speaker yesterday talked about as Indra's net, this deep fundamental interrelatedness among all life. And I think what it helps to do is reduce attachment to a fixed sense of self-identity. And therefore, it also reduces attachment to a particular set, a version of self or self-identity, of ways of looking at things. And so you can respond spontaneously in the moment to whatever situation is arising. So it gives you a flexibility, a sense of fluidity that is also important for people to have in the world. I think, as we end the conference, I want to take the opportunity to remind all of you that each and every one of us, each and every one of you, is this unique confluence of forces, events, influences, karmic forces, if you will. That we all have flowing selves with a unique and ever-changing window on the world. Be open to practice. Be open to meditational and contemplative practices. They have the potential to transform our flowing selves so that each of us may attain the universal longing of all human beings and all creatures, that in the words of my late and lamented friend, the Canadian poet Leonard Cohen, like a bird on a wire, like a drunken sub-midnight choir, I have tried in my way to be free. And with that, thank you very much.